In this video, I want to show you a patching schedule that I've been working on for a large project. Now, typically in corporate projects in the past, even on larger ones, I've been able to draw within my schematics the patching routes, because for a large portion, the infrastructure cabling is all pretty much a fixed route, or even when we have flexible equipment like maybe a portable screen or a trolley, we have certain ports and floor boxes which are dedicated for the AV equipment, and those connections back to the switch are kind of a fixed quantity. Those ports are always live, and so there's not a lot of dynamic manual patching that's happening, or the areas that are being patched are small enough that you can put it logically on a single schematic drawing. Now, this particular project that I've been working on has been a different can of beans, in that there's literally thousands of endpoints. We've got multiple rack rooms, interconnections between those rack rooms, a lot of loose, sort of more like pro AV broadcast equipment. So thinking about like large mixing consoles and things of that nature, multiple breakout racks, things that need to be moved around. And so that traditional approach, when I started laying it out, and I might have one rack room with maybe 9 different fiber patch panels with 96 ports on each one of those patch panels. If you start trying to lay that out on one piece of paper, it just gets infinitely too small and unreadable, and it's just an unmanageable way of documenting that kind of information. So I looked at how I consulted with other people on the project and looked at how best to do it, and so it was really made sense that it be done in Excel, be done as a spreadsheet. But that then got me wondering, how do I make a spreadsheet readable? How do I bring all of these thousands of different bits of information, so cabling schedules and the information about the network switch and the SFPs that go into that and all those different connections, how do I put that in a way that is human beings can actually read it? And also, how can it be updated? Because it is more of a production environment, you've got people that are manually changing these patching routes, and so having them on a schematic isn't really going to work. You need something that the on-site staff are able to change and update as things move and get updated. And so I spent a bit of time thinking about it, and I've come to a solution. I would say it's kind of 90% complete. There's a couple of little things that I want to add in, but I wanted to bring it and share it with you guys because I think there could be value for any of you that may end up wrestling with some of the same dilemmas that I went through. Let's take a look at it now. Okay, so I want to start off by explaining the infrastructure of how the building's laid out, and then it's going to make sense, a bit more sense when we look at the actual spreadsheet itself. So starting in the rack room, so there's multiple rack rooms inside of this project. So we have connections from the other rack rooms coming into the rack room, and so they're connected to what we call the backbone patch panels. Then we have the Nexus frame, so this is essentially the main network switch, which is networking all of the equipment inside of the building. All of the ports from the network switch are then replicated sort of one-to-one onto a patch panel, so onto a Nexus patch panel. Then we have the rack hardware, which is inside of the rack room, so all of the amplifiers, AV equipment, etc., which is in the rack room. So the network ports from those devices are then replicated, attached to a AV rack patch panels. Then we have the field patch panels. So these are all the connections outside of the rack room, essentially. So all of the floor boxes, the projector locations, the technical wall plates, all of those sorts of connections inside of the building are then fed and are displayed on the patch panel. And so then from one of the patching racks, we're then able to connect AV equipment out to the field, or AV equipment in the rack to the Nexus patch panel, to the network switch inside of the building, etc. And so there's a lot of different patching which is happening in all different ways. And so basically how I've laid it out is like this, is I've used several separate sheets inside of this spreadsheet. So I've broken it up similar to the drawing that we looked at. So I've listed all of the endpoints inside of the project. So in a meeting room here, you can see we've got a projector, we've got some unterminated connections, and then we've got some floor boxes which are inside of that meeting room in this space. So we've got the endpoints, we've got the endpoint patch panels. So this is the field patch panels, as well as the backbone patch panels, the rack patch panels. Then the patches, so I have a individual line, and we'll have a look a little closer in a moment. We have an individual line for the patch, and that's where the record keeping is kind of updated. We have the Nexus patch panels for the network switch, and then for the Nexus frames for the actual network switches themselves. Now, a lot of this is upfront data entry that's not going to have to be repeated. So, for instance, with the endpoint patch panels, if I zoom this in so you can actually see what's going on here, this is essentially taking the location, which rack room we're looking at, the patch panel ID, so we have a unique ID on every patch panel, and then the port, so the individual port on that patch panel. Then anything in green in this spreadsheet is a formula, so it is all the green stuff is automatically populated. Anything with a grey header here is a manually entered data. And so basically it takes that information and it sticky tapes it together and creates a unique patch panel port ID, so a unique ID. And then we can then link that ID to an endpoint ID. So for all of the endpoints, zoom in here a bit more. So for all of the endpoints here, we're listing the floor of the building that they're on, the name of the building, the ID. So I've created an individual ID for each space. So space ID. Endpoint name is like a readable, like a full information, user readable name for the endpoint, whether it's single mode, multi-mode, or Cat6. And then the endpoint ID. So this endpoint ID is what I'm using to tie together the endpoints in the patches sheet that we'll look at in a moment. And then I've got the IDs, unique IDs for the actual MVX encoders, which are the systems then connected to. The green columns again are automatically populated, so I can see that this unit here is connected to this patch panel. So this is going to AV3 rack room. It's a multi-mode patch panel 201 port A1. And this is a hyperlink. So if I click on this, it actually takes me through to that port on the endpoint patches. So this is the patch panel in the rack. That's our field patch panel that's connected down to something, in this case is rack, so it's coming from a piece of equipment in the rack room, but it may be a field endpoint. So if I come back to a floor box again, so here's a floor box in meeting room 101. If I select the link here, I can see that on this field patch panel, I have selected this floor box as the connection. So this is where the connection is, where I'm joining these two things together, is for this patch panel. I'm saying this is the endpoint ID, and that then ties together here. And then I'm using a formula to pull the name of that patch panel from that sheet into this sheet. So that's the endpoints to the field patch panels. And we'll come to the patches tab in a moment, but I'll show you what's happening on the network side of things is kind of a very similar sort of thing. So for the Nexus frames, this part is the network switches. So the actual network switches themselves. So we've got the grey information is kind of manually added again. So we've got the location, the frame, the card in the frame, and then the port inside the frame. And so I'm using all of that information then is sticky taped together, and that creates the switch port ID. So this is the unique ID. So each sheet has kind of a unique identifier that I'm using to pull all the information together. So this is the unique identifier, which shows me exactly which frame and which port is connected to. Again, the green information is auto-populated. So we have the switch port ID and then a patch ID. Then we look at the Nexus patch panel. So again, this is just a patch panel that basically replicates the ports from the switch onto a patch panel at the front of the rack that can then be patched. So we have the grey information, which is manually entered again. So here's all of the patch panel, the Nexus patch panel information. that is then sticky taped together to create a unique ID that can be then linked. Then in the blue port here, this is where this blue column, switch port ID, this is where we're assigning the switch port to the Nexus patch panel. So this is where we're setting this connection. So once this is set up, this page, this sheet shouldn't really be touched very much. This should be kind of a permanent link. And then this column next to it is basically takes the value of the switch port ID and makes it a hyperlink. So if I want to look at that, if I click on that, it takes us back to the Nexus frames sheet, and I can zoom in on that and see if I want to have a look at that. And I've noticed noted the SFP, so the SFP that's installed, and I've got a couple of different options for the SFPs. So I've set the formulas for that, so you can just click a drop down and set the actual SFP loaded into the frame. Now, where this all comes together is under the Patches tab. So, the Patches tab, now this purple, you can kind of ignore the purple cells. That's some information pulled from the configuration of the frame. I'm just using to validate the data. But you'll notice that in this Patches tab, which should be the kind of the most used part, hopefully this is capturing so you guys can see this all right. You'll notice that most of this sheet is green, so most of this is all automated. So the only two bits of data we have to change is the patch panel port and the Nexus patch panel port. So the Nexus patch panel port is I've already filled out with, so this column here, G, I've already filled out with all of the ports of all of the Nexus frames, and then essentially I can put in the field patch panel or the rack patch panel or the backbone patch panel that is then connecting through. When you add a patch panel port ID in here, the spreadsheet is then going and looking and matching the patch panel to the endpoint ID that patch panel is connected to. So we've got the endpoint ID, which is also hyperlinked, and then from the endpoint ID we're then pulling in the readable name as well as the actual location. So just by setting this patch panel ID, I can now see the full path. So the patch ID is the unique identifier for this page, and it essentially equates to just the row of the spread of this sheet. Of this is the patch ID. And so once something is selected, I can then see the whole path. So on level 4, in the rack room, there is a Exterity unit, and it is then connected to this rack patch panel, which then is patched to this Nexus patch panel, which is then connected to this port on the network switch. So I can see the entire patch all the way through, and the operator only needs to basically manage this one column of what is then being connected. Hopefully that all makes sense. I've tried to explain that as simply as possible. Hopefully that probably gives you an idea of how that all works together, and you can think about that when creating your own schedules. If this is something that you're actually want to dive into, I'm happy to go into do like a more in-depth tutorial and actually talk about the formulas I've used and how this all ties together. But essentially kind of the key difference here was just separating out the endpoints, the different kinds of patch panels, and then having a unique line which tracks the actual patch, and then pulling the data in so that it can all be seen and pretty easily managed. I haven't quite finished this project's still in play, and there's a couple of things that I want to add, like there's mobile equipment, so things like lecterns, and so I'm going to add another page so you can select where that lectern is connected, and then it's going to pull all the data through, and you can actually track all the loose equipment and where it's currently patched, so the people operating the space have a really good record of where everything's plugged in and how it all moves through. That's really it. If you have any questions, and like I say, if I get enough people, I'll probably need more than 1 or 2 people, but if you guys are really keen and interested, then I'm happy to go into the formulas and things, because it did take a bit of time to nut this out and make it all work, but it's I think it's running pretty smoothly now. Cool, that's it.